Hello, everyone. We have a treat today. We will talk about the kite configuration or the kite pattern in astrology with Lynn Koiner. So Lynn Koiner, she is an LPMA-FA. She has been a full-time professional astrologer since 1969. She's globally respected astrologer and teacher with over 5 decades of experience in traditional, psychological, medical, and esoteric astrology. And let me tell you, she also has a lot of experience in research in astrology. Lynn teaches medical astrology at the International Academy of Astrology for certification since 2009. And her students are now respected and published astrologers from around the world. Twice has she been honored with the Sims Pounds Award for Best Conference Speaker. She is also a contributing author to the astrology book and Noel Till's Astrology's Partial Measurements. Many of her writings and lectures can be found at her popular website, lynnkoiner.com, that you have on the screen. And people ask questions about any of the articles, and she responds promptly. Let me tell you, this is true because I've had emailed her many times, and she responds. So if you have questions, you can message her. Now, what is an astrological kite? Just the essentials is a geometric configuration on the sky with a combination of several angles, 3 trines, 2 sextiles, and 1 opposition. And Lynn will explain all about it. So now I will allow Lynn to share everything that she's prepared to share with us. So Lynn, I stop share and then you go ahead.
Okay, now how do I turn on my screen share? Um,
There is a green button at the bottom where it says share, and then you choose the screen that you would like to share.
okay, okay, let me see. Okay, let's see.
We can
Oh,
pause if you like, and you take your time. Okay.
when it's up there.
Okay, now you got it. Okay.
Okay,
Can you make it bigger so it is uh, at the bottom there is a sliding thing at the corner. Yes, yes. Uh-huh. Just one
okay,
page at a time.
okay. The kite pattern, one of the easiest ways to spot it is that there is a grand trine. That is a planet in each of one of the elements. Like a grand fire trine would be something in Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. An earth sign would be Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. Air would be Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. And a grand a grand water trine would be Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. And having a true grand trine is very unusual. To have a kite is much more common. I'm always surprised when I see someone who has a grand trine and it's not a kite. So a kite always indicates there's an opposition to one of the planets in your grand trine. Now, I've got a lot of notes here, and those who kind of get this recording will see all of these notes. I don't send them out, but you'll have everything right on your screen. Now, I'll talk about when I first started to research the kite. This was many, many years ago. And when I started to look at the charts of clients who had a kite, now they were this was a long time ago. So one of the most common ones was a grand air trine with Pluto opposing a planet in Aquarius. And so I would see that a lot of times. And then what I would notice is that, well, a kite tends to affect money issues. Well, actually, later on, I would see this as actually being connected, what the person wanted to do in the world. And an opposition always involves a block. There's that opposition. You go to the opposition and you work with that opposition. You resolve the conflict of the opposition so it frees up the kite pattern. I always say a kite is like a bicycle wheel spinning around, and you put a stick in and it stops the spokes, and all of a sudden it jams to a stop. Uh, I have some examples of transiting kites of things that happened recently, but let's talk about the natal chart. So it is more than just money. But the opposition was kind of I have it highlighted here, a distortion or wrong attitude where money is concerned that kept them from using the kite. And when Pluto was involved, there was always control issues. And there was a woman, I always use her an example because it was one of the common ones of, I was doing readings in the 80s, so I would have a lot of people born in the mid 1940s who would have this grand air trine, and it would be involved in a kite. And so what happened with the Pluto opposition, I remember this woman wanted to start a specific type of, uh, it's a grand air trine. Grand air trines are very good at communications, ideas, problem solving, and they have an idea to accomplish something. When the opposition to one of the planets in the kite is Pluto, then they want to be in control. They're not willing to compromise. Oppositions require that you compromise. And if you can't compromise on that opposition, you're never going to use that kite. And in her case, she just felt like when it came to grants, she wasn't or getting the financing. She wanted it done her way. She had to be in control. She was not going to work with other people. It had to be done her way. And as a result, she retired and never accomplished what she set out to do with that grand air trine. It just never happened because I said, I am going to do it my way, even if it means I have to come up with the money myself. She never came up with a large sum it required to start the business, and she never accomplished her goals. When there's sextiles in the chart, the opposition has some sextiles to the other planets and signs in that grand trine. And especially I notice charts with a lot of sextiles, these people have to ask for help. It will always be given. And I've seen people who had a lot, I mean, everything was formed in a sextile in the chart. And I said, when it comes to getting what you want, you're going to have to ask for help. There's something in your karma that says that you don't ask for help. And in this lifetime, you're not going to get what you want unless you ask for help. And I remember this one woman, she says, you told me this after several readings. And finally, she says, well, I'm going to give it a try. And I started to ask for help. And I couldn't believe how many people were willing to help me. So sextiles require that you ask for help, and it will be given. So the first step, when people write to me and say, because on my website, I often get, and I just got about 15 minutes ago, somebody wrote about her kite pattern in her chart. I haven't had a chance to answer it yet. Um, when they send me a chart, I always know I've got a lot of things about the four elements, but if it's fire, it's the ability to motivate and inspire other people. They have a vision. Earth signs are kind of builders, practical, organizational people. Air signs are communications, ideas, inventive thinking, working on mediation skills. And water is working with intuition, being able to express a lot of your feelings, having a trust or faith in the future. But when it's an opposition, sometimes there are fears that come that do not make the person want to compromise on that opposition. Okay, so that I always look at the opposition. If I say the best books to look up what an opposition is, there's a book, it's out of print. It's by Betty Lundstedt, Astrological Insights into the Personality. It really, I've had a couple of books many years ago that I felt were life altering because it got me to thinking about how to interpret aspects. I know Sue Tompkins does a psychological interpretation of the aspects, and these are much better than the more traditional and conservative interpretation of aspects. When I first started doing astrology, I just worked with progressions because there were no real books on transits, and the ones that were there were so gloomy and, from a couple hundred years ago, have an early death, gloom and misery. And it wasn't until Rob Hand wrote his book on planets and youth that all of a sudden you had a new, fresh outlook on aspects. Now, the second stage of my research was that kites are involved with disasters. And I remember, oh, this was years ago, don't do it now. There were books, I guess you can go to the library, and then there are almanacs. One almanac is information, please. And I keep all my old ones because sometimes they don't include older information in like dates of when things happened. So information, please. And then you get this from the libraries. It's called Facts on File. And you can go back and you can do this online. You can go back in history and find out what happened on a specific date. And what I noticed as I was doing charts for disasters, I saw that there was almost always a kite pattern involved, especially a pattern that, as a result of the disaster, important changes were made, changes in technology and environmental issues. There were always major changes that occurred as a result. And so what it is when I would see, when I would be preparing the chart and I would see a kite pattern, I'd go to my information please and look up their birth date. And I would see that a disaster occurred when they were born. Now, it wasn't a disaster in their area. Sometimes I saw one in China, there was a great flood, or there was some disaster, a bridge broke. There was always some type of disaster that occurred right around the time. Oh, it has here, one girl was born at the time of the Great Flood in Wales. Well, here she was born in the United States, so that flood did not affect her. But it shows at the time there are disasters somewhere in the world, there's going to be some type of kite pattern occurring. Now, one of the things I looked back, I don't know if I have it here, I looked back over the disasters connected with NASA, the Columbia and the Challenger. When there are space disasters, there was always a kite pattern involved. I have further down the 9/11. There was a kite involved. So it doesn't mean you don't travel when there's a kite pattern. But, when there's a disaster, almost always a kite pattern is involved. Now, the next kind of stage I'm thinking of is what does a kite feel like? When there's one in the sky and you're doing things, what does it feel like? And one occurred recently on Thursday. And I went back, I said, what was going on Thursday? It was a very frustrating day. And sure enough, there was a grand air trine with an opposition. And what I noticed, this was back in the 1990s, I was going to an AFA convention in Chicago. And that day when we were leaving, there was a kite pattern involved. And my God, there was just so much disruptions, especially with an air sign. It was in the airport. There were so many cancellations. I was stuck in Kentucky for 5 hours. And in the airport, there was a disruption in the air conditioned system, and everybody became kind of irritable and cranky from the heat and becoming very impatient. And almost 12 hours after our journey began, we finally ended up in our hotel. And it was when we turned on the news, we heard there was a plane crash in New York. So I said, at least we arrived in our destination safe. So we no longer complained. So because the energies were so bad that day with that kite, we both felt so lucky that we arrived in Chicago at all. So that strange disruptive electrical energy that we felt all day was the energy of the kite. It was in a grand fire trine with Uranus was in Aquarius. That's how long ago it was. And so what it is that massive power of a fire trine had been blocked energetically by Uranus. And that erupted in a plane disaster, and all kinds of disasters are taking place at the airport. Looking at other charts, let's say I recently recognized I was feeling out of control with my eating. And at first I thought it was a hormonal thing because it lasted about 2 weeks. And it's kind of unusual for me. And it was kind of a nervous, compulsive energy. And when I wasn't eating, my hands would shake. And what happened is, and it kind of, well, it was on the evening of the 26th. And I checked the aspects for that night. And a friend reminded me, isn't that the night of the bombing in Atlanta? And sure enough, it was. So at 1:20 a.m. on July 27th, this was years ago, there was a bomb exploded in Atlanta's Central Park. And I said, lo and behold, there was a grand fire trine with an opposition from Uranus in Aquarius opposing the Sun in Leo. So I really started to understand what it felt like to have a kite going on. And and if it affects you, I'm not going to say it affects everybody, but if you're trying to do something, often there is a kite pattern involved. And here we have for 9/11 a grand air trine, and Uranus is opposing Venus. This here is trans-Pluto. I wrote a really good article that is going to come out in the NCGR journal. I think it's supposed to be an article on the trans-Neptunian planets. And so they wanted to include trans-Pluto because it hasn't actually been spotted. But was it Theodore Landscheid first came up with the position of which he called trans-Pluto because it was just outside the orbit of Pluto. And I just resonated to it, started doing research on it. If you go on my website, the chapter from the Noel Till book is posted on my website, and that talks a little bit about how I started to research trans-Pluto. Other people have noticed that trans-Pluto sometimes is involved when there's some type of disaster. But surely this was a disaster with Uranus opposing Venus and trans-Pluto. I'll just add, trans-Pluto is like a super Virgo. It has to do with the critical perfectionist upbringing that eventually should take you to wholeness and integration. While I have some summaries on trans-Pluto on my website, the article that appears in the NCGR journal is really a good summary of trans-Pluto and how it works in the chart. So you can see here, when there's a disaster, you're going to find a kite pattern taking place. Now, eclipses, disaster cycles, and the kite pattern. I have a lot of, it was an article I posted. I put the charts, but I don't have all the charts here. Um, there was about the Oklahoma bombing. I call it a transformational crises lunar eclipse. I think it was Richard Noley calls them, what is it, super moons. Well, I don't find anything super about them. Back in the 1970s, well, I didn't have much. Back then in the 1970s, all I had was the Farmer's Almanac. And it would list a lot of astrological patterns that were going on, including the perigee and apogee moon, and also the eclipses that would be taking place. And so I call them crises lunations. There's usually 8 of them during the year. There's 4 new moons and 4 full moons, and sometimes they occur on a lunar eclipse. And it's really, I used to use, well, it's when the moon is physically very close to the Earth, which is called a perigee. And so the closer to the Earth it is, the more disruptive it is. Now, usually I publish this, I have an astro column, it's free. Starting in October, we will have 4 crises lunations. If you write to me at lynn.koiner@gmail, I can put you on the mailing list for my astro column. And in October, I'm going to be listing the crises lunations. Um, that will be taking place, at least for October, but it occurs for 4 months. So it'll be October, November, December, and January. There's going to be a perigee lunation. I forget whether it's a new or full moon, but say a perigee lunation. And so there's often these disasters, and it tends to be much more dramatic when it occurs around the time of an eclipse, especially if that is a crisis lunation, where the eclipse, the moon, is physically very close to the Earth. Now, there's in the 1990s, there was an inordinate high incidence of flight disasters with these kite patterns because at that time there was a lot of the grand fire trines. Um, and so if I have the chart for Kitty Hawk. I use the Kitty Hawk chart as the birth chart for the airplane. And it really works. Often when there's a disaster, you'll find planets in Sagittarius or Aquarius because there's a lot of planets in Sagittarius and Aquarius in the Kitty Hawk chart. And so sometimes when there are air disasters or NASA disasters, you're going to find that it's often connected with the Kitty Hawk chart. And here I have about the Challenger disaster and how it was connected with the Scorpio Aquarius square in the Kitty Hawk chart. Um, let's see. Well, I've got some more information here. I'm not going to go into all of this about how you can tell where a disaster is going to take place using astrocartography and what a crisis lunation is. Now, oh, this was the woman I mentioned at the beginning who had a grand air trine with Pluto opposing it. And there's a planet in the 8th house. So she had a great humanitarian vision that during her life, and now she's at a retirement home, she was never able to actualize this because she was totally unwilling to compromise on her vision, feeling that if she would lose control to outside interference, it was not going to manifest the way she wanted. Her way was not necessarily the best way, but she is projecting through Pluto that all authority figures will control or usurp your power. And that is a good interpretation of a Pluto opposition in a kite pattern. Let me see. Let me see. Oh, an opposition. You have to kind of understand an opposition aspect. It tends to operate differently from a square or that 90-degree aspect because oppositions have to do with hostilities, attitudes, and resentment that we project onto other people, forcing them to respond in a similar manner. I know there was a woman who had a Moon Mars aspect opposition in her chart. And she says, well, she had a lot of oppositions in her chart. And she says, I realize the opposing energy that I experience in other people really starts in myself because I really interpret how the other person is going to react. And I choose the opposite. As a result, a polarization takes place. And she says, I realize I've got to stop that. I have to be more open and receptive to other people. And I'm going to give an example of there was a woman, let's say, if a woman has the moon square Mars, it's going to describe a mother who was jealous of, I would say in terms of a female. If a female has a moon square Mars, it describes a mother who was jealous of her daughter because she felt the mother very frustrated and unfulfilled in her life. She perceives the daughter with the Moon Mars aspect as being closer to the father than herself. And so there's a jealousy that she sees the daughter as competition or a threat. However, when the daughter has an opposition from the moon to Mars, the daughter becomes jealous or resentful of the mother because being young, she can't do the things that mother's able to do. And she kind of projects that resentment onto the mother, causing the mother to react with anger and hostility. So the daughter sees the mother as angry and hostile, but she's not able to objectively examine her own behavior that led to and instigated the mother's angry responses. So when you have an opposition, it's going to require a lot of self-examination. That why are people opposing me or doing the opposite? Is it something that I'm doing or initiating that is causing them to react in a certain way? Now there was, oh, this was the woman who told me she became very mature at analyzing her oppositions. And she confided that it always appeared that everyone opposed what she wanted to do. She says, but the truth be known, I anticipate their reaction and then purposely choose the opposite. But as she matured, she learned to examine her reactions and make healthy compromises in her life and in her relationships. And now she's a successful mediation attorney. So you can resolve that and open up that grand fire, the grand trine. But you have to understand and examine yourself as to how that opposition is taking place, what it's doing to cause other people to oppose what you want to do. Now, obviously, the opposition bestows a high degree of independence and willfulness that the square doesn't. The square can make us feel more insecure. And it is fed by the power and confidence of the grand trine. Um, it is not so it's not impossible for the person to make compromises to activate that trine, but it takes a lot of self-examination and soul searching to find out what's going on here with that opposition. Let me see. I'm not going to go into these are things that happened in the past. Oh, what it felt like recently. This was on Thursday, September 18th. Uh, some frustration took place. You know, I have a 1 acre farm in the city. I guess it's a farmette. And I've leased some of the plots to some young people, a nonprofit that grow things. And on Thursdays, we sell our produce. I have honey and flowers and some tomatoes, and then I have fruit, figs and persimmons. And this Thursday, I knew I had to leave early. I wanted to leave at 6:30 because there was a protest occurring near where I live. And a famous politician, Jamie Raskin, sometimes you see him on television. And there were people who had started a march from Philadelphia, where the Constitution was formed. They marched on September 6th to march from Philadelphia to Washington. And they stopped at churches, and at a local church on the main road, they were going to be there, and then we were all going to picket on the highway. I'm a protester. I didn't protest in the 60s, but by God, I protest now. And what happened when I was supposed to leave? There was supposed to be somebody I was supposed to take, and he makes all of our signs. Well, I had some signs I could take, and I waited and waited. And after about 15 minutes, I said, I don't know where Dan is. We just have to leave because we're running late. It's supposed to start at 6:30. And I went out to my car, and somebody had parked their car right in front of my car, blocked my driveway. So here we had the frustration of the guy not showing up, and I wanted to wait because I didn't want him to come and me not be there. And then when we gave up on him and went to the car, and here we have hundreds of people in my yard listening to music and entertainment. It was the Ethiopian New Year, which is one of our biggest events every September. And so I was so frustrated. I grabbed that microphone and just said, um, uh, that somebody has, this is what I said. I said, somebody has parked their big ass GNC big white car in front of my car. I said, it has to be moved immediately because I'm going to protest against Donald Trump. And then I let down the microphone and started to walk away, and people started to clap. Yay, Lynn. And so a friend and I, they moved the car, but it was that initial frustration. And when I announced it to the public, get your big ass vehicle out of my yard. And the woman raced over and apologized because parking is very difficult. But I was said, that was so frustrating for me. I felt it. Were aspects to my chart because I have Jupiter at 1 degree of Libra. So these things are kind of around opposing my Jupiter. And so it may have been why and this is on, Jupiter is on my natal Saturn, maybe why I experienced the frustration, maybe more than the other two people. But we got up there in plenty of time and everything worked out. But it was that frustration of somebody not coming and not knowing where he is. He met us up at the church. And then having my car blocked, and how can I find the person out of this huge crowd to come and move their car? And it was very easy, and we got out of there. Now, I'm not going to go into this in great detail because you've got it here in the article. I believe it's on my website, but this article is a little more updated. There's something called a black dragon or a black kite, and it's made up of only bad aspects. And what it is when I see it in a natal chart, I'll see a square, a perfect square, and an opposition that intersects it. And then you have a square, an opposition, two 45-degree aspects, and either 150 or 135 degree aspects between. So there's no good aspects to it. And whenever those take place, it indicates that there's a conflict, but what seems to be the reason for that conflict isn't the real reason. The opposition or the square is not the real reason for that conflict. There are other minor aspects, the 45, the 150, or the 135. There are other minor aspects that you don't kind of know about that are feeding the conflict. And I first saw this having to do with I was in eclipse on August 21st, 1914, that the European astrologer said that this triggered World War I. Now, what happens, it seemed like it was somebody shot the crown prince in Sarajevo, but that wasn't the reason. The Germans were itching to have some type of conflict whereby they could take over Serbia, defeat the Serbs, and then actually conquer the rest of Europe. They were very envious of other countries, Italy and the Netherlands, who had conquered countries and areas in, whether it was in the Caribbean or in India. They had big money makers outside their own country, and Germany felt we're landlocked and we don't get to do these things. So there were a lot of other reasons behind this. It wasn't just the crown prince being shot. And so whenever you see it, the person may experience, I don't see it very often. There was an astrologer, and I cannot remember her name, who had been researching this. Um, and it really has to do with that the person has conflicts in their life, but that's not really what the problem is. There was one woman who I saw, she had one of the kite, was it a black dragon or the black kite in her chart. And one of the minor afflictions was the sun forming a 45-degree aspect to Venus. Now, I will tell you what that aspect means, whether it's involved in a black dragon or not. It indicates that the person always feels very unattractive. Sometimes they can put a lot of energy into wearing expensive clothing or beautifying themselves, but in the undercurrent, that person always feels ugly, and that has an impact on her relationships with other people. I usually see this with females. And so she was always afraid that if people got close, they would realize she isn't very pretty. And she was afraid that they would realize how insecure and unattractive she is. And so therefore she had a lot of problems in her relationships. Now there was one, and I know that there was a lot of going on, and I haven't gone back to make a note of what was going on. There's about a 1 week period which there was one of these black dragons, and this is done for. It was an astrologer. This was done for I think September 17th. There was an astrologer in Slovenia who posted this and said he saw all these aspects, all these patterns in the chart. And you can see here that there is Jupiter is squaring Mars, but this Saturn with Neptune opposition to Mercury is forming a core opposition. And so I know politically there was a lot of things going on in the world, and it may have to do with that. There are other things, even with Donald Trump. He may be causing a problem in one area, but that's not it. Maybe it's he wants to take the focus off the Epstein files. So that's kind of an example of, oh, I'm going to, I don't know, start a war with Bermuda. And that's really to cover up the fact that I want you to forget about the Epstein files. That's a good example of how a black dragon works. And this is my interpretation of the minor aspects. I'm not going to go into all of these, but it's interpretation of the minor aspects. Let's see. Oh, this is what 135-degree aspect. It was a young man. I knew his mother. Mother was a client, and he had a moon Neptune aspect, and he always have felt that his mother abandoned him. And what had happened when he was 6 months old, his parents were in the diplomatic corps, and the mother left him with a family member and went away for 6 months to do something in another country, just didn't want to take him. And he always had these issues around abandonment, and not always allowing people to get too close. Now I've got here, it kind of helps people. The planets in opposition to a grand trine kite. I'm not going to read all of this. You can remember the opposition represents qualities, hostilities, attitudes, and resentments that are really kind of part of ourself that we project onto other people. So I've repeated some of this stuff. Now, with the sun moon opposition, so you would, I don't mention like Mercury or Venus because often they're very close to the sun, and it's not always possible just to see a Mercury in opposition to another planet. You're often going to see the sun in there too. So I didn't include that. But with the sun moon opposition, first of all, I'll mention that when you have a sun moon opposition, it indicates your parents were 180 degrees from each other. They were not alike at all. And if you look at the degree of separation from exactness, say it doesn't matter which one planet, say the sun is at 10 degrees and the moon is at 6 degrees. Then you say at the age of 4, that's the difference between 6 and 10, you started to realize how different your parents were and picking up on this. And so the person has two very different qualities. Prince William has the sun moon opposition, the sun in Cancer, the moon in Capricorn. And you obviously can see Prince Charles, his father, and Princess Diana were 180 degrees from each other. One was very emotional, one was very, uh, uh, conservative and reserved in his feelings. So the moon in Capricorn really was part of his father, where the sun in Cancer was really connected with his mother. And so he's kind of pulled in opposite directions. And I believe Princess Catherine has a similar opposition in her chart. So when you have a sun moon opposition in a kite, it causes a great deal of discontent. It's like the choices you make, they don't always feel satisfying because you have like Cancer and Capricorn. Does it satisfy my emotional needs or my security needs? And so there's kind of pulled in different directions between the head and heart type of conflict. So it's there's that compromise is the need to find something that satisfies both. Say just in the chart of well, you can say with the royal family, Charles and William, the conflict between Cancer and Capricorn gets resolved because he's in a very structured institution, but he does a lot of humanitarian work. He expresses the Cancer through being like his mother, very tactile and, touching other people and working at things that are evoke a great deal of emotion, but doing it under the, I guess, using the structure of the royal family or royalty. Okay. So with that sun moon, they're not content with the choices that they make, and there's a need to kind of integrate those polarities. Now with Mars, we talked about that, how your own was it, anger issues get projected onto other people. Usually, if Mars is retrograde as the opposing planet, it's going to be opposite the sun. And so the individual does not show anger, sends out mixed messages, and explodes all of a sudden. If you go to natal retrogrades on my website, you'll get a lot of information about natal retrogrades. And Mars and Uranus retrograde tend to operate very similarly. They tend to bottle up, and then all of a sudden explode. And it seems to come out of nowhere, and people don't know where this came from. But a lot of the anger is kind of internalized. All of a sudden, they blow up. And the individual, because it's in opposition, may have a tendency to blame other people. But they need to learn to compromise and recognize their own anger issues. Now, if it's in mutable signs, the person gets angry and then leaves. With the mutables, it's avoidance where possible. If that doesn't work, try something else. With cardinals, it creates crises through causing crises, getting involved in crises, or through their own indecisiveness because they're afraid of the outcome. And fixed signs just don't compromise out of a stubbornness as a control issue. Now, Jupiter, this planet, I was reading a psychological a book. I think it was Your Inner Child of the Past by Hugh Messeldine, that I really started to understand Jupiter. And I believe Betty Lundsted's Astrological Insights into the Personality touch on this, that Jupiter has to do with our sense of moderation and proportion. Mine is afflicted, so I never know, do I have a lot of money or am I poor? I just don't know. Did I eat a lot today, or maybe I didn't eat enough? I not moderation and proportion. I have a poor sense. How much time is it going to take to get someplace? So I usually end up being very early because I don't know how long it will take. And so with Jupiter opposing, they can have high expectations in terms of other people or the situation. And it can have to do with like giving up when the going gets rough. Well, they said they were going to do this. It never really happened. I know what is this? Let's see. Um, Individual might learn a sense of moderation, not give too much of themselves away in order to make people like them. Jupiter has a fear of abandonment. And I remember when I was telling this to a psychologist, she started folding her arms and said, "Well, I've never heard that before." I said, it's the fear of abandonment. If I don't live up to the expectations of other people, they expect me to be brilliant and do these things. If I don't live up to their expectations, they're going to become disappointed and abandon me. And all of a sudden, it made it much clearer to them as to how Jupiter has to do with abandonment issues. And so Jupiter, it needs a lot of freedom, and they don't often want to compromise. Jupiter tends to play a role, and it tends to do this in order to establish a relationship, to get what they want. And then they feel taken for granted, and then they quit. Um, I have a Venus-Jupiter aspect, and Venus is in Cancer. So when I want to show love and appreciation, I tend to cook. I don't like to cook. I tend to like to cook things like I bake, like banana bread or cookies or fudge and candies and stuff like that. I tend to cook in order to, I used to, I don't do that anymore. I would cook in order to establish a relationship because that's what my mother did. But once the relationship is established, I don't do that anymore. And then people feel, well, you changed. I thought you loved to cook, but you're not cooking anymore. And I hate to cook. I just did it to establish the relationship. So with Jupiter, you do certain things to establish a relationship. And once it's established, you start to feel taken for granted when they're expecting you to do things that you don't really like doing. And then you're more inclined to quit. However, Jupiter is the most creative planet in the zodiac. Neptune is imagination. Venus is our sense of taste, of the type of creativity that we have. My mother had Venus in Gemini. She was very good at cartooning because we have a family of famous cartoonists. And if you know Alfred E. Newman from Mad Magazine, my cousin who's passed away, Frank Kelly Freas, he originated Alfred E. Newman. And so Jupiter is pure creativity. And so working with creativity is going to be helpful in resolving the opposition. If there's a Mars-Jupiter aspect, the person tends to overreact to anything that seems unjust or unfair. Um, and this aspect, if you have that aspect, you don't have to be part of a kite. This is just my interpretation. Jupiter-Saturn aspects is the same as Uranus-Saturn aspects. I'm torn between what I want to do and what I have to do. I feel if I fulfill all of my obligations, I've sacrificed every scrap of my personal freedom, so I don't enjoy it. And so it's finding that compromise of how much freedom do I need, and then kind of cut back on some of the responsibilities. Jupiter-Pluto aspects, they're very sensitive to people who are controlling or manipulative, who are phony. They're very sensitive to phony people. And if they detect somebody's playing a game, boy, the wall goes down and they cannot relate to that person ever again. Now, if Saturn is the opposing planet, that's kind of obvious because it has to do with responsibilities. And it's important not to assume responsibilities that are going to limit you in some way. Do not assume responsibilities that you don't want to assume, but have been conditioned to accept through parental indoctrination. And I've got an example of this. Somebody wrote a week ago, and I said, do you mind if I use your chart on this lecture? It's kind of further down. And so sometimes there can be a guilt, a fear of commitment. And so like a Saturn-Pluto aspect has to feel, well, if I don't do it all and do it perfectly, if I'm not in control, something terrible is going to happen. So Saturn projects an attitude that other people are going to limit you. Remember, it's an opposition. They're going to restrict and trap you in some way. A Sun Saturn, well, the squares are much more insecure than the opposition. The oppositions tend to cop an attitude. The individual will not be a team player, project this image, and therefore they're not going to go very far because of insubordination. And with Uranus, it projects that others are going to try to change you. They're going to suddenly leave or abandon you if you rebel and you don't trust them. When people get to, with Uranus difficult aspects, when people get too close, they change and they leave you. What happens for the opposition, when people reach a certain level of closeness, the person tends to react like, I'm going to leave you before you leave me. And then, of course, the relationship ends. Uranus bestows a highly charged electromagnetic field. And when people get too close, they go off and push other people away. And if you look at the degree of separation in the opposition, you're going to find the event that occurred in their life that triggered that problem. Say if there's a 10-degree, that's why I allow wide orbs with these aspects, with the hard aspects. See if there's a 10-degree degree difference between the opposing, say, Moon Uranus. Then at the age of 10, something happened. Mother left. There was a woman, she just always thought she was a wonderful mother. And a lot of her children had the Moon Uranus aspects. And you could see that it occurred around the same time. And I said, what happened that your children feel that you changed suddenly and they have these fear of closeness, that all of a sudden they can be really happy and the person is going to change. And she says, oh no, well, what happened at that year? And she says, oh, she says, I was in South America. And she says, I was in an abusive relationship and I didn't want my husband to know that I was going to leave and leave the country. I never told the children. They came home from school one day. The suitcases were packed. We went to the airport and we never saw that man again. And the children, they were traumatized by this and they have a fear that, things can be really happy. You go to school, everything's wonderful, and then all of a sudden it suddenly ends. So all of our children had that problem. Now, Neptune has to do with denial issues. They project their own reality onto others and circumstances and then don't understand what went wrong. They can see themselves in an unrealistic way. I shouldn't put this man's name in here. I went with him for many years. He always saw himself in a heroic role, but he wasn't heroic at all. If Neptune is in Scorpio, that tends to be much more in terms of they insist on their distorted reality. And if it's a Neptune-Mars aspect, like a Neptune, it can be even a square, but then we'll deal with the opposition. They often talk a lot about what they're going to do, and then they don't do it because often they had a parent who did not want them to grow up and go away and were always sabotaging their initiatives so they can talk themselves out of doing something. And they attract people who talk themselves out of doing things. I have a square. And almost every relationship I've had, it's been somebody who says, well, you don't have to do that. Even Bill, as good as he is, he's got a Mars-Neptune conjunction. And he's telling me, you're doing too much. You're working too hard in the yard. And I said, what's going to happen? The grass has to be cut. They're always, well, you're doing too much. I'm not doing too much. But they tend to talk me out of doing things. I don't buy into it. Because I've learned to just go ahead and do it. I have a Mars Uranus, so I tend to rebel against this attitude. And Pluto has to do with a control issue. They want to be in control, have things their way. It's not my way, it's not going to be done right, or it's not going to be done at all. So we've talked about the Pluto aspects. I just put this in here, the Kitty Hawk chart. If you're ever looking at disasters involving airplanes, you can look and see this is the first flight chart. And so it would be the chart of the for the airplane. Now, this was an interpretation of a kite. This is somebody who wrote to me and says, I've got a kite, but I don't understand how to resolve because I've got the moon in opposition to all of these planets. How do you think the kite works? And you can see the grand fire trine here. And the moon is opposing Libra. But I know what a lot of these Libra things are. So you look, it's difficult because it's an opposition to a stellium in Leo. Now, I told him to go to my website and look to my articles on stelliums. If you have a stellium, it's important to go to the opposite house because you have a stellium like Pluto in Capricorn was squaring all of this stuff. And that means it's going to be a long bad period with Pluto hitting all of those planets that tend to operate in unison. And I would say go to the opposite house. And stelliums tend to like oppositions. It kind of gives you, it makes it easier to make that choice in the fourth house. And the fourth house means that you have your own business, you work out of your own home. You don't have to work under the thumb of an authority figure. Because with Saturn and Pluto in that 10th house, there are always going to be problems with authority figures or bosses in the workplace. So you have to go to the fourth house where you work out of your own home, where you can be more in control. Even school teachers, can have that, avoiding authority figures because they're the boss in the classroom. Um, and let's see, there's Pluto and Uranus transiting air signs are going to favor the 10th house, but Pluto in Capricorn was the problem, squaring from 6 degrees to 24 degrees. And Libra, what happens is when you have a lot of Libra, Libra wants to be the fixer. It feels that it has to fix everything. All the problems that are generated by an authority figure, they have to go in and fix things. Because Saturn describes the type of responsibility we were exposed to as a child. And when Saturn is in Libra, it is, well, clean up your room because company's coming. Go change your clothes, take a bath and change your clothes because Aunt Harriet's coming over. It was always do something because of somebody else. And so they see all the responsibilities are geared towards other people. And Libra tends to be fixers. They don't like conflict and stress, so they're drawn into fixing things. Pluto trines are empowering, and Uranus trines tend to be liberating. And the Uranus Libra compromise of the kite urges him not to feel that you're responsible for others and the mistakes or problems of other people. And this is what he wrote back to me. I recognize a lot of what you say, especially when Pluto was in Capricorn squaring that stellium. This was a very difficult time. And I will tell you, one of the things about astrology, I always look at transits. I really retired from doing a lot of readings. That's why I usually do a lot of stuff for free. I teach though, and I do research. And it's sometimes what I would do like a 3-year period. Like this year and the next two, and the next year would be in much more in detail, and the third year it would be kind of a general overview. And what would happen is that with astrology, you can see how long the bad aspects are going to last. They may be just for this year, and after this year, it's all going to be over. So that's one of the things astrology does cheat. There was a woman, she had a stellium in Scorpio. This was a long time, and she went to, I guess in the State Department, went to Chechnya. And and I said, you've got these bad aspects going on for 7 years. And she was in Chechnya for 7 years. And obviously there was a war going on. She says, it was just awful. She says, but I knew after that period, I was going to come back stateside, retire, and it was all going to be over. And that's exactly what happened. Although there was another woman, I told her that she was going to start a business and there were successful aspects to her stellium. And I said that you're going to be working on this business for so many years and don't give up on it because there'll be some bad aspects in between, but don't give up because when that aspect is over, you're going to sell the business and retire for the rest of your life. And she says, when the bad times would come, she says, I just hold on to the fact that after that period, I think it was a 3-year period, that I was going to sell this business and never work again. And that's exactly what happened. Even with health problems, she had a health problem. I saw when it started and I saw when it would end. I said, it's going to last 18 months. And I gave her, like in March of the next year, I said, it will be over. And all of a sudden, your pain is going to be gone. And her son said, she just lived for that date because she knew it would be over. And sure enough, when that date came, it was a type of neuralgia that only lasts maybe 12 to 18 months. And I knew hers was going to last the 18 months. So astrology can tell you how long the bad aspects are going to last and when things are going to get better. Okay, one of the other suggestions, having all this Libra not being strong enough, you was studying Alice Bailey. Um, I there's something called the seven rays, and that's associated with sound and color. And so usually for people who want to extrovert themselves, become much more assertive, I suggest sound therapy. And the easiest for me is I say, first get a CD with or download Wagner's greatest hits. You don't need all of his greatest hits, but first start listening to the Ride of the Valkyrie every day. Listen to bum 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 bum. It's a short. Listen to that every day, and then when you feel like it, listen to the entrance of the gods into Valhalla. I said, you listen to that long enough, it's going to have you goose stepping around the house and not putting up with crap from anybody. So that was my suggestion to him, how not to kind of fall into that fixer, being responsible for other people, that is inclined to happen with the Libra stellium. And I remember there was a girl many years ago. She was so shy and so insecure. And I told her, you need to start wearing American Beauty Rose Red, like a deep blue red. That's an assertive color. Um, and listen to Valkyrie and the entrance of the gods into Valhalla. And I know she started to cry. Oh, my husband, he's going to be so mad at me when I go home. And about 6 months later, she called. She says, I immediately downloaded those two pieces. I would meditate every day and listen to that music. She says, after 6 months, after 6 weeks, she says, I told my husband I was tired of his abusive behavior. I'm getting out of here. And so I moved to Wisconsin with my sister and I'm studying astrology. So, I mean, if that woman can extrovert, then anybody can listening to this music. Now, I'm going to kind of stop here. I'm just going to scroll down about the four elements. So you can have an idea of what they are in terms of, say, a grand trine in terms of the four elements. I'm not going to go into them. I did it very briefly. Um, Let me see. Okay, I did it very briefly. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to ask Sat if you can give me, if you have any questions. I'm going to go back. Let me go page up. I'm going to go back to the beginning and you can ask me any questions before
Yeah.
people get tired.
I
Um,
was wondering, what do you think about the current kite? Because we have this small triangle, right? Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, and then Pluto. That every time there is another planet on the other end, either in the Virgo and beginning of Libra, beginning of Libra, we have, for example, every month we've had the moon since July 1st. Every time the moon goes there, something happens very significant, and then we had Mars going through that point, and recently Mercury, right?
yes,
Um,
yes.
so tell us a little bit of these transits,
Well,
if
I
you
I
may.
just I just did. I talked about how when I wanted to go protest, there was so
Yeah.
many blocks, and so what it is with the transiting kites, I don't put a lot of energy into the moon because it lasts for a brief period of time, but it can be just as frustrating for a short period of time. I would not initiate anything of importance at the time there's a strong kite, especially if the planets in that kite hit some of your natal planets. If they don't, it's not going to be as noticeable. But remember, when there are kites in the sky, there's always some type of disaster somewhere. I can't always pick it out. I do have information here when you scroll down about doing astrocartography for finding the locations where some type of crises or disaster may take place. So
Yeah.
when there is a kite, you're going to find a disaster someplace. And it's not as strong with the moon. Or if it hits things in your natal chart, you're going to feel the frustration of being in the airport and the air condition doesn't work, or the planes get canceled. You start, or somebody blocked my car and I couldn't leave when I wanted to leave. You start noticing frustrating situations. That's really what a crisis, a kite does. In your own chart, the frustration takes place because of some aspect of your unwillingness to compromise. And in the natal chart, you have to learn to compromise with those opposing planets. And I've given you information about the opposing planets and how they might contribute to um, uh, issues involving compromise.
Yeah, and the Aries Libra axis is relational, right, by essence. Yeah. Okay, any final tips or advice or anything else that you might add?
I know you asked me something about how to use astrology to help your life. I don't look at the aspects every day. Um, but things that have helped me a lot is one, if it's a bad aspect, how long it's going to last. I'll add one thing. When it comes to a progressed Mercury aspect, it's always going to start 6 months before the computer picks it to be exact.
Mhm.
If it has September 1st is when Mercury squares your Mars, then on I'm going to say 6 months earlier, let's say March 1st, that's when the aspect kicks in. And by the time it gets to the exact point, it's over. A friend of mine, her son got into a lot of legal problems, and it started 6 months before a bad Mercury Mars aspect. And she says, "Oh my God," she says, "coming up this fall, if the aspect is going to be exact, do you know what's going to happen?" I said, "By then it's going to be over. The bad part starts 6 months earlier." And I learned this from Catherine Grant when she picked an aspect, a Mercury crossing my Venus, and she picked it 6 months before it was exact. This is back in the 1960s, so I had to calculate all this stuff by hand. And then I realized Mercury must start, and that has always worked for me. The other thing is electional charts. I have an astro column that tells you good days for beginning things. And it tells you, like, if you're an Aquarius, the moon is in Aquarius on these dates, and it's has a lot of bad aspects, and the last aspect the moon makes is going to be the outcome of the matter. Normally, just don't pay any attention to those bad dates, but don't initiate anything bad under a bad aspect. And I will tell you, I have an astrological picnic that I have been doing for 50 years. Except for COVID, I have had them every year for 50 years. I always calculate a good day astrologically when the moon only makes favorable aspects, especially at the time it leaves the sign it's in. The last aspect is the outcome of the matter. And I will tell you, I've never had to cancel my picnic in 50 years because of bad weather. One time there was a Mars-Jupiter opposition that around 2 o'clock in the afternoon would be on the ascendant-descendant axis. And there was this one astrologer who does really good weather forecasting. He says, 2 o'clock, there's going to be this terrible thunderstorm. I said, but the moon only makes favorable aspects. I said, so I don't know where that storm's going to be, but it's not going to be here. And at 2 o'clock, you could hear thunder off, in a town that's just 3 miles away. You could hear thunder and all kinds of stuff, but I looked up in the sky and it was blue. And I said, you see, it occurred someplace else and not here. So electional work is really important. In my astro column, I'll list the favorable dates to start something. When I go on my trips to Europe, I always pick a good day astrologically. I've picked October 23rd to go to Europe. And I will tell you, there's never been a disaster. Things may happen, but all of a sudden somebody helps me out. And everything runs smoothly on my trips. So I think practicing electional astrology is very important for an astrologer for the timing of things. And my astro column is free. Anybody who writes to me, lynn.koiner@gmail, you can get the column and it'll list the good dates to initiate things. And it gives a little information about, well, it's good for socializing or relationships or parties or whatever. Um, Knowing electional astrology has really helped me a lot. Now, if I have to go someplace because I don't have a choice, I never look at the aspects. I just get a ticket and go on the plane. If there's a conference, I'm not going to wait for a good day that might be a week earlier before the conference. I don't look at the aspects because if you look at the aspects, it's going to energize those aspects. I never look at them. I just get my ticket to get on that plane to go to Chicago in 2026. And I don't look at it because I don't want to energize the bad aspects. So if there's something I always use for myself, it's an electional astrology for doing something important. I'll give one example. I wanted to buy a copier. This was back in the 1980s. And I picked a date when the last aspect was to Mars. And Mars will often cut things, like cut the price. And when I went into this place where I wanted to buy this copier, this Toshiba copier, I heard the man say the price was $1,200. Well, that was more than it was a couple of weeks ago. And so I very loudly told a friend, I said, listen, I'm not going to pay a dime over $1,000 for this thing because that's what it was. And the guy came, oh, you're in luck today. It's on sale for $1,000. So he indeed cut the price by $200. So electionals, knowing electionals or either getting them off of my astro column, it's very, very important for the timing of major events. So does that answer your questions?
Yes, thank you so much, Lynn. It's been a pleasure. And if you stop sharing, I'm gonna share the closing slides. So here is the contact for Lynn. This is her website, and she actually has a page. It's called the Kite Pattern, where you can read more about it. And this is my contact information. So thank you so much, Lynn.
Well,
It's
thank you
a
for asking.
pleasure. I always learn so much from you. Actually, your Saturn is on in conjunct is conjunct my Mercury. So I guess you are your karma is being my teacher.
Very good. Well, I've had a long-term relationship with Bill and uh, his Saturn. My Saturn is on his Mercury, and his Saturn is on my Mercury.
Oh.
So we've been together for about 35 years. So that aspect really works in a positive way.
Okay, yes, so far I'm very pleased to have met you and learning from you. Thank you so much.
And
So
thank
we'll
you.
stop recording here.